You know, being a journalist can sometimes be risky business, especially when you're covering terrorist organizations overseas. The reports that gunmen on a motorcycle shot at a broadcast journalist in his car in the Afghan capital of Kabul, wounding him. To talk about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, Ali Sharifi, a journalist for the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting, survived the attack late Friday night.
Yeah, there's two sides to this story, right? First is to look at the crimes of the Taliban. Of course, in Kabul more than anywhere else, you're seeing this hot spot of recurring attacks on people like the volleyball player from the women's team that was killed last week, and this week we're seeing an attack on a journalist, more attacks on other journalists and dancers and people who are in the arts. So obviously, this is something that we're going to keep our eye on to see, how this all ends up. We were told that this is not going to be the Taliban of the 90s, but they're proving to be worse, far worse. And the West has taken their eyes off of the Taliban. The only discussions we're hearing is about how much aid they're going to get. Let me tell you, that aid is not going to go for the people of Afghanistan. It's going to go towards terrorism and more of their terrorist sprees, and we know that. On the other hand, this is a journalist from the Islamic Republic, meaning there's a reason why this guy was allowed to be on the ground over there. You're not going to see, Western journalists, particularly women, freely reporting in Afghanistan, but here you have a male from the Islamic Republic. They're of the same kind. The Taliban and the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic doesn't have a free press, so if you have a journalist from there, this guy is working for a state-run organization which is pro-regime and knows how to deal with the Taliban and other terror organizations, and they know the lay of the land, and they know Islamic law, Sharia law, and they know how to behave. So if this is going on, then I would say it's probably a random crime. Just more of the same, but it gives us a perspective as to what's going on the ground in Afghanistan.
Lisa, there are also reports that Taliban gunmen also attacked a wedding in eastern Afghanistan to stop music being played, killing at least 2 and injuring 10 others.
Yes, if you recall, the Taliban of the 90s, from 1996 to 2001, put a decree in forbidding music. This new Taliban has not yet issued a decree, but we can tell by the way that they are cracking down on any sort of vice that they deem is Western and anti-Islamic, like music, like the arts, like dancing, like sports, like women being educated, and the list goes on. So unfortunately, this is a horrific story about a wedding being disrupted, 2 being killed, many others injured, because this group that claimed to be of the Taliban wanted to stop the music from being played. Look, they are really smacking down, and they're letting the people of Afghanistan know what they stand for and what they don't stand for. And this is nothing new. It's nothing progressive, and it's nothing reformed from the old Taliban. And we're not hearing anything from rights groups or people in the West. All we hear about is, how this is going to be different than the Taliban of the 90s, but we're not seeing anything of the sort.
The Taliban's supreme leader made his first public appearance since taking control of the group back in 2016, addressing supporters in the southern city of Kandahar.
Yeah, interesting, because we haven't seen this guy ever since he took over the group. What's interesting is that he didn't give this new speech in Kabul, where we know that there are a lot of people against the Taliban takeover in the capital city, but it was in a southern province. This shows us they're taking a page out of the Islamic Republic of Iran's handbook, where they are pandering to the lower socioeconomic brackets, the more religious brackets, those who may support them and be okay with a Taliban takeover, but they have not had the guts, or they're not brave enough to go into the capital city of Kabul, where we know that there has been such a heavy opposition to the Taliban takeover, to make their statements there. What it also shows us is that little by little, the Taliban are, coming into their own, confidently stepping onto the scene and saying, we don't have to be in hiding anymore. We're on Twitter, we come out into weddings, we come out into the public, and we're giving speeches. So they definitely feel as though they have steady ground to stand on. And of course they do. And they're being legitimized by places like the UN and the West, where there is such a call to legitimize the Taliban. They also have friends in Pakistan and China and Iran who are calling for the West and other nations to support them and legitimize them, just like they do.
U.S. President Joe Biden says the United States will respond to actions Iran has taken against Washington's interests, including recent drone strikes. Now, this comes after American officials have blamed Iran for a drone attack on a remote U.S. outpost in Syria, Lisa.
Yeah, there's mixed messages coming from the White House with regards to Iran. On the one hand, there's talk of how quickly can we get back to the negotiating table, that the major world powers would like to sit back down with Iran to discuss a potential deal going forward. And on the other hand, there are threats or sort of a retaliation kind of tone saying, don't you dare do X, Y, and Z because we will respond measure for measure, including the drone strikes. Don't think that these are pinpointed and silent and that we won't respond to them. So there's definitely mixed messaging coming from the White House. And what is the Iranian regime to believe? They are, the United States is rushing towards another deal with us. They would love to get back into another deal, but then they serve up these empty threats. They're not going anywhere. They know exactly where they stand. And unfortunately, they believe that with this current White House, they're the ones who have the upper hand in going forward and striking a deal with the West.
Fortunately, there were no deaths or injuries reported as a result of that October 20th drone strike attack here. Now, Lisa, speaking of which, the U.S. Air Force is flexing its muscles recently as it flew a B-1B strategic bomber over key maritime choke points in the Middle East with allies, including Israel, amid ongoing tensions with Iran as its nuclear deal, which you mentioned, remains in tatters.
Yeah, another instance of mixed messaging, right? This is the old United States foreign policy where we are, allied with Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East that is our partner in the Middle East, militarily and otherwise. And yet we have this drill with Israel in flexing muscles against Iran, which has shown much more provocation in the region as of late. So trying to deliver a message there. But again, what is that message saying? And then what's the message of saying we want to get back into a deal with you? Look, the Iranian regime, they're no dummies. They're looking at this, the flexing of military muscle and saying, all right, you want to show us that you're partnered up with Israel, our enemy in the region. Well, we'll retaliate against them and we'll also get a deal because that's what you're telling us. It's being understood as something very different. I cover Iranian press. I follow their tweets. I read what's going on in Farsi. And look, they take us for fools here in the United States. So the mixed messaging isn't helping to deliver a stern message to the Iranian regime, to the Ayatollahs. It's just doing the opposite. But on the other hand, the silver lining here being that we are doing and conducting drills with Israel, our ally. And despite what you may hear from four very bitter congresswomen who are anti-Israel, our relationship with Israel is still intact, it seems.
Now, Lisa, the first images of China's new controversial jet have emerged. The two-seater Chengdu J-20 is the latest in China's stealth fighter fleet. Let me ask you something. Should we be concerned here in the West?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that there are articles and headlines about China's new technology tells me one thing. We should be very worried about how quickly and with such motivation that they're carrying forward their weapons program in the sense of development, research, coming up with new technologies. Before, in the past 2 decades, it used to be our worry was that China was copying our technology, right? They would capture a drone and they would copy it and then they'd put it out under a different name, or they'd capture a drone from some other country and copy it and put it out under a different name. Now we're worried about them actually surpassing the United States. And there have been many experts that have come out in recent months to say, hello, wake up. We need to watch China. They are becoming militarily very advanced and taking on the United States with regards to the competition in military might, and the fact that they are putting out articles and it's news that they're putting out new technology, then that's something that we should definitely be focused in on.
U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. It was all part of the recent Group of 20 summit. Now, officials say the outreach was designed to ensure that the highly competitive nature between the two world's largest economies doesn't really veer into open conflicts.
Yeah, they can try. I mean, look, this kind of diplomacy that this administration loves to use never works, particularly with the Chinese partners. Look, the Chinese are out for blood. They're out to beat us on everything. They're not looking to collaborate. They're not here to hold hands and go forward together. They're here to beat us. And regardless of how many sideline talks they can have at the G20 or any other summit, the Chinese have made it very clear that they are competitive, that they want an edge, not not just in their own region, but globally. And they do have an edge in many, many areas. And that's something to worry about. Look, Anthony Blinken should come home and say, I met with my Chinese counterpart, and the discussion didn't go anywhere. And we exchanged words. But the action and the tone, I should say, is clear that the Chinese want to speed on forward, and that's really a wake up call. We can travel to these summits and we can use diplomacy as much as we want, but there's not going to be any change in behavior from rogue states like China, like Iran, like North Korea, where they want to employ, nuclear diplomacy. It's just not going to work. We have to think of other solutions to these foreign policy crises.
I wonder how much tension there'll be as well between U.S. President Joe Biden and Xi Jinping in China, especially when I was a kid growing up. I don't know about you, but almost everything I had was made in China. The toys, a lot of my clothes, and now there's this kind of a protectionist vision now with Joe Biden that, let's bring all the manufacturing, everything back to the United States. So that may not sit well with Xi Jinping.
No, it won't sit well with him, and it's going to be almost impossible. Look, we are in a supply crisis here in the West, particularly in the United States. It's something that's being talked about very much. I think it's something that was on Biden's agenda at the G20 as well, to talk about the supply chain crisis that's going on globally. Obviously, the perfect storm being the pandemic and a labor shortage and supply shortage and all of that, contributing to the crisis that we have. Now, in the midst of all of this, imagine how difficult it'll be to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Virtually impossible when we are relying on cheap labor and cheap manufacturing from China. Of course, the moral of the story being that we should not rely on China because we can't get these goods to come in. But in the midst of this labor shortage and everything else that's going on here in the United States, with prices being, skyrocketing, I don't know how it is in Canada, but we're feeling it at the pumps, we're feeling it at the grocery store, we're feeling it everywhere. Basic things are costing, a 50% or more in many areas, and there's no supply. You go to the grocery store and the shelves are actually empty. And because of this crisis, it's going to be very difficult to really point our fingers at the Chinese and say, we're going to teach you a lesson. I think it's going to be the other way around.
Ed, you're right here. Inflation has gone up 4.4%, and we're talking about the food, shelter, gas prices. You're absolutely right, Lisa. It's being felt all over the place. Now, here's a real sad story. A knife and an arson attack on an underground train line in Tokyo, Japan, left at least 17 people injured. Police arrested a 24-year-old man who was wearing a costume similar to the Joker, except this was no joke.
No, this is awful. I mean, the reason why I included this in my morning briefing this morning is because you don't see this kind of crime coming out of Japan, which is why it's a real story. If this was coming out of Manhattan or Chicago, I don't think it would be as much of a story, even though it is here in the West. This is a story because you don't see crime like this happening in Japan. It's a place where people are trusting of one another. They leave their doors open. There's an honesty policy. And to see this kind of anger and this kind of violence against people that are just riding in a train, it's just horrific. This was a horrific story. I don't know if it was influenced by Halloween or if it was influenced by movies and such, but this person was obviously not well mentally, and very, very sad for the families of the victims. Really sad, something that you don't expect just riding a train.
You're right. I have friends in Japan, in Tokyo specifically, and it's not part of their culture, this kind of violence, so it is a shock for many people in that region. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.